Hello, my name is Carl Smith, and it's a pleasure to be able to present to you at this year's Conservation Symposium. Today, I would like to share some experiences and a brief story about a dead whale, a marine protected area, a concessionaire, and some tourists. As whale populations recover, the frequency of natural whale mortalities and beach strandings is expected to increase. In addition, anthropogenic-caused injury and mortality, such as ship strikes, fishing gear entanglement, and plastic ingestion is also likely to increase. The management of dead and live whale strandings can be complex with multiple factors needing to be taken into consideration. There are generally four potential management actions to follow. The first is a hands-off or do-nothing approach. The second is to bury the carcass on site. Third is remove the carcass to a landfill site, either whole or in pieces. And four is to tow the carcass further offshore. Each of these options has their own pros and cons, costs, and situational applicability. No action is preferable in remote areas, has no cost, promotes natural decomposition processes, and provides an opportunistic nutrient source for scavengers. However, on popular beaches or near urban centers, there's increasing pressure to remove carcasses, primarily due to the unpleasant sight, offensive smell, and the potential health issues, including concern around sharks being attracted to the area. Burial has increased costs, but is relatively simple depending on site characteristics. However, there are concerns over nutrient enrichments, a lengthy decomposition process, and the leachates potentially attracting sharks. Removal is the most costly and has logistical constraints. Now, I'd like to point out that you are removing essentially a free ecosystem service, nutrient cycling, but at the same time, you're increasing your carbon cost depending on the distance traveled, and also entails the dispersal of all ropes, plastic sheets, tarpaulins, and personal protective gear that's been used in the operation. Towing out to sea is only really viable when the carcass is still floating, and it provides a scavenging opportunity, but may wash out again later, and is also seen as a small boating hazard. I must just point out that the minimum costs here are based on our experience in the garden route over the last few years, including the cost of equipment and machinery, but does not include personnel costs, which would increase these substantially. Management authorities need to take all these considerations into account when determining a course of action with added public pressure. Normally, if a whale carcass washed up in an MPA remote from public use areas or settlements, a hands-off approach would be followed. However, on the 29th of September 2019, a large humpback whale washed ashore in the Tsitsikamma MPA. Unfortunately, it washed up at Storms River within the tourism hub of the park, which included a public hiking trail, a very popular hiking trail, the restaurant, and an area where a concessionaire undertakes various water activities, including scuba diving, snorkeling, swimming, and kayaking. Shortly after the whale carcass washed ashore, concern was being expressed as to the impact the carcass may have on parks tourism. Both Sandparks Tourism and Hospitality Services Division and a local tourism concessionaire were concerned that the smell would be off-putting, while safety was an issue for water activities, in particular due to the potential shark attraction. Furthermore, the duration of the disturbance was unknown. The site inspection, in consultation with relevant stakeholders, including the concessionaire, the then Department of Environmental Affairs, National Sea Rescue Institute, local stranding network representatives, and Sandparks was undertaken, and the various management options were evaluated. Due to the steep, rocky terrain, the orientation of the carcass to the swell direction, the safety of respondents, the previous management options were deemed to be unviable, and a decision was made to leave the carcass in situ. Recommendations included that all snorkeling and diving to be stopped, and that for kayak safety, a new starting point be implemented in the gorge as opposed to starting on the beach. Although all the concerns raised were around the impact on tourists and visitors, no formal complaints had been received from these sectors, and the situation provided an opportunity to gain insight into park visitors' perceptions around carcass management, the awareness of the MPA, and whether contextual information around the whale carcass influenced their views on carcass management. We interviewed 80 visitors with a short open-ended questionnaire, and all interviews were conducted within 3 weeks of the whale carcass washing ashore. Responses were digitally captured and analyzed in 2 steps. In the first step, key themes were identified within the responses. This was done independently by the first 2 authors. The responses were then reassessed and quantified according to the identified themes, again independently by the first 2 authors. Any discrepancies were then discussed amongst the group and resolved. Chi-square tests of independence were undertaken to determine if visitors' views on carcass management were related to the awareness of the MPA, and secondly, whether visitors' views changed after being provided more contextual information. So what did we find? Well, firstly, there was no relationship between visitors' awareness of the MPA setting and their views on whale carcass management, meaning the results are likely to be consistent independent of the MPA. However, on a side, and in the context of this symposium, I think it's very important to note that only a third of visitors were aware of the MPA. So yes, they were aware they were visiting a national park and of the terrestrial protection, but they were unaware that this extended offshore. Furthermore, when asked what their views of what an MPA is, a very strong theme emerged of these being places of increased control with restrictions on various activities. To me, it's concerning that the benefits of MPAs were not articulated or acknowledged. A large proportion of visitors were unaware of the carcass, but only 2% indicated that had they been aware of the carcass prior to the visit, they may have reconsidered coming to the park. 53% indicated interest in seeing the carcass, and this interest was mostly due to a curiosity around the size, so interest in seeing how big these animals really were, whilst 41% would not want to see it, mostly due to emotional reasons and finding it distressing. In terms of carcass management, it was interesting to see that 50% of visitors thought that the carcass should be left alone with no management intervention being necessary. This is higher than expected, and many felt that it was natural for whales to die and to wash ashore, and as such, nature should be left to do its thing. But there were some caveats to this, in that many felt that had it washed ashore directly in front of the accommodation units, then management intervention would have been necessary. Of the 35% that said management intervention was required, these were generally because of negative emotions that they felt in seeing the dead whale, the potential smell, and also the possible provision for research. Visitors generally enjoyed and appreciated the contextual information provided, finding it interesting and useful, and there was a significant change in carcass management preferences, with an increase in respondents indicating that no intervention was necessary. A concern raised early on was around the duration of the decomposition process and how long any interruption would be for tourism activities. There was no hard answer for this. However, we monitored the decomposition process, and within 75 days, the only signs of the whale carcass left were the bones washed up on the beach. Speaking to the concessionaire holder later, they were very surprised at the speed with which the carcass had broken up, and they indicated that over this period, yes, they had lost some income, mainly through no snorkeling and scuba diving, but they had also had minimal complaints from their customers. Those complaints that they had received were around the kayaking trip and the change in the starting venue and missing out on the open water sections. Importantly, they had been very happy with the level of engagement and support provided throughout the process. So in conclusion, whale carcass management can be complex even in a marine protected area, with multiple technical, economic, environmental, social, and legislative factors to consider. Although we can be guided by generic flowcharts such as this one, each context will be different. Our experience has shown that being inclusive in the decision-making process from the very beginning enabled a co-learning experience and increased acceptance with the final decision. Engagement with the process became more important than the final decision. For visitors, whale carcasses generate curiosity but also some very strong negative emotions, and to me raises a few questions around people's perceptions of nature. Providing information to visitors was helpful and well received and generated increased support for the management decision. However, an indirect outcome of the project really highlights the importance of continued MPA awareness raising, and in particular around the local and global benefits of our MPA networks for conservation, improved fisheries, and healthier, more resilient oceans. Garnering public support is a critical component of promoting our network expansion efforts. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions.